fleeing forced wedding. She desperately kissed a guard. He was a billionaire CEO. Daphne Langford stared at her reflection in the antique mirror, her dark eyes wide with barely contained panic. The ivory silk wedding dress clung to her like a beautiful prison, its intricate beadwork catching the morning light streaming through the mansion's tall windows. Each crystal seemed to mock her, sparkling with the promise of a future she never chose. The sound of her father's voice echoed from the hallway beyond her bedroom door, sharp and commanding as he barked orders to the wedding staff. The ceremony begins in exactly 43 minutes. I want every detail perfect. This merger, this wedding, represents the future of both our families. Merger. Not marriage, not love. Just business dressed in white silk and orange blossoms. Daphne's hands trembled as she reached for the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The woman who had whispered to her as a child about following her heart, about the magic that happened when two souls truly recognized each other. What would grandmother say about this arranged spectacle? "Miss Daphne," Mrs. Florence Abernathy's gentle voice came through the door. "Your father requests your presence in the foyer in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes before she would walk down that marble staircase to meet Bradford Whitmore III, a man whose idea of romance was discussing quarterly profit margins over champagne. 10 minutes before, she would promise to love, honor, and obey someone who saw her as nothing more than a beautiful business acquisition. "I'll be right there, Mrs. Abernathy," Daphne called back, her voice steadier than she felt. But as the housekeeper's footsteps faded down the corridor, Daphne made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't do it. She couldn't sacrifice her dreams, her freedom, her very soul on the altar of her father's ambition. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she gathered the voluminous skirts of her dress and moved toward the window. 3 stories down, the mansion's manicured gardens stretched toward the iron gates that separated the Langford estate from the outside world. Guests were already arriving in their luxury vehicles, a parade of society's elite come to witness her beautiful surrender. But Daphne Langford had never surrendered to anything in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. She slipped off her satin heels and opened her bedroom door just enough to peer into the hallway. Empty. The sounds of preparation echoed from the main floor, flowers being arranged, musicians tuning their instruments, the low murmur of early guests being seated in the mansion's grand ballroom. With her dress bunched in her hands, Daphne ran barefoot down the servants' corridor, her heart racing with each step. She knew these halls as well as she knew her own dreams of designing sustainable fashion, of creating beauty that didn't come at the cost of the planet or her principles. Those dreams felt impossibly far away now, but freedom was just beyond the mansion's walls. The service entrance led to a narrow hallway that connected to the main floor. From there, she could slip through the kitchen, out the back door, and disappear into the gardens before anyone noticed she was missing. But as she rounded the corner, her escape route dissolved into chaos. The hallway buzzed with activity. Caterers rushed back and forth with silver trays, florists made last-minute adjustments to towering arrangements, and security personnel, why were there so many security guards, stationed themselves at every possible exit. Daphne pressed herself against the wall, the rough stone cool against her bare shoulders. Her carefully planned escape suddenly seemed impossible. Every door, every window, every possible way out was blocked by someone who would immediately recognize the runaway bride. Panic clawed at her throat. She couldn't go back. She couldn't walk down that aisle and promise her life to a man who would never see her as anything more than a trophy wife. But she couldn't get out either. That's when she saw him. Stationed near the garden entrance stood a security guard she didn't recognize. Unlike the others who carried themselves with the military precision her father preferred, this man had an entirely different presence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd run his hands through it, and there was something in his blue eyes that seemed almost kind. More importantly, he was alone, and he was standing between her and freedom. Daphne didn't think. She couldn't afford to think. In less than 5 minutes, someone would notice she wasn't in her room. In less than 10 minutes, her father would come looking for her himself. This stranger was her only chance. She stepped out from the shadows, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. The guard turned at her movement, and for a moment their eyes met across the hallway. His expression shifted from professional alertness to something that looked almost like recognition, though she was certain they'd never met before. "I need your help," she whispered as she approached him, her voice barely audible above the sounds of wedding preparation. He straightened slightly, his gaze taking in her wedding dress, her disheveled hair, the desperation that must have been written across her face. "Miss Langford," he said quietly, "you should be—" "I know where I should be," Daphne interrupted, stepping closer to him. Close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely masculine. "But I can't. I won't. Please. I just need to get past you to that door." For a moment, he seemed to study her face, as if he were looking for something beyond the obvious desperation of a runaway bride. "Miss, I can't let you—" "Then I'm sorry for what I'm about to do." Before he could react, before she could lose her nerve, Daphne grabbed the front of his security uniform and pulled him down to her. Their lips met in a kiss, born of pure desperation, a wild gamble that if she could distract him long enough, she could slip past him to freedom. But the moment their mouths touched, everything changed. This wasn't supposed to happen. The kiss was supposed to be a distraction, a means to an end. Instead, it became an awakening. His lips were warm and surprisingly gentle, moving against hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. His hands came up to cradle her face as if she were something precious, something worth cherishing. And for one perfect moment, Daphne forgot about escape plans and forced marriages and everything, except the incredible feeling of being kissed by someone who seemed to mean it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The guard's eyes were wide with surprise, but there was something else there too, something that looked like hunger, like he'd been starving for exactly this kind of connection and hadn't even known it. Daphne started, then stopped. She'd planned to apologize, to thank him for the distraction and run, but the words wouldn't come. Not when he was looking at her like she was a miracle he'd never expected to encounter. "That was," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "A mistake," Daphne finished quickly, though every fiber of her being protested the lie. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I just needed—" "Daphne!" Her father's voice boomed from somewhere nearby, sharp with irritation. "Where is my daughter?" The spell broke. Reality crashed back in waves of silk and panic and the approaching sound of Harrison Langford's footsteps. The guard, whose name she didn't even know, stepped back as if he'd been burned. "Go," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "The garden door. I'll tell them I haven't seen you." Daphne stared at him in amazement. "Why would you do that?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. "Because someone who kisses like that deserves to choose her own destiny." Without another word, he moved to block the hallway entrance, positioning himself so that anyone coming from the main floor would have to go through him to see the garden door. Daphne gathered her skirts and ran, her bare feet flying over the cool marble, her heart pounding with more than just the adrenaline of escape. She burst through the garden door into the morning sunlight, the scent of roses and jasmine washing over her like a benediction. Behind her, she could hear her father's voice growing closer, could hear the controlled chaos as the household realized the bride was missing. But all she could think about was the stranger with the kind eyes who had kissed her like she mattered, who had let her go even though it was his job to stop her. Who was he? Why had he helped her? And why? Couldn't she stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, as if he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to kiss him with such desperate honesty? If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. Daphne had always prided herself on being logical, practical, focused. She was the daughter who had earned her MBA at the top of her class, who understood market analytics and business strategy better than most men twice her age. She was supposed to be the one who thought things through, who planned every move carefully. So why was she hiding behind a garden trellis in a $2,000 wedding dress, thinking about a security guard whose name she didn't even know? The Langford estate gardens stretched for acres, a carefully maintained paradise that had been featured in architectural magazines more than once. Ancient oak trees provided shade for winding pathways lined with heritage roses, while marble fountains created a symphony of water music that should have been soothing. Today, it all felt like an elaborate stage set for a play she refused to perform in. From her hiding spot, Daphne could see the mansion in chaos. Security guards moved through the gardens like hunting dogs, calling her name with increasing urgency. Through the tall windows, she glimpsed her father's imposing figure as he gestured angrily at anyone within reach. Bradford Whitmore III stood beside him in his perfectly tailored morning coat, looking more annoyed than heartbroken that his bride had vanished. But it was the guard who had let her escape that captured her attention. Even from a distance, she could see him stationed near the garden entrance, his posture professional as he spoke with Commander Rosewood, the head of security. Whatever he was saying, he was keeping his promise to cover for her. Why? The question haunted her as she crouched among the roses, their thorns catching at her silk skirts. She was Harrison Langford's daughter, the pampered heiress who lived in a world of privilege that most people could only dream of. To a working-class security guard, she should represent everything that was wrong with society's divisions. So why had he looked at her with such understanding? Why had he kissed her back as if she were the answer to a prayer he'd never dared to voice? And why couldn't she forget the feeling of his hands cradling her face like she was something infinitely precious? "Think, Daphne," she whispered to herself, trying to force her scattered thoughts into some kind of order. She needed a real plan. Hiding in the gardens would only work for so long. Eventually, they would search every inch of the estate, and when they found her, her father would make sure she never had another chance at freedom. But where could she go? Her trust fund was controlled by her father until her wedding day, a detail that had never seemed significant until this moment. Her closest friends were all inside the mansion, dressed in their bridesmaid gowns and probably worrying sick about her. She had her phone, but any credit card transaction would be traced within minutes. "Miss?" Daphne's heart nearly stopped as a voice spoke from just behind her hiding spot. She spun around, prepared to run, only to find herself face to face with the mysterious guard once again. Up close, in the garden sunlight, he was even more striking than she'd first thought. His dark hair had hints of auburn that caught the light, and his blue eyes held depths that spoke of intelligence and something that looked almost like sadness. He moved with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his position, as if he were more accustomed to giving orders than taking them. "How did you find me?" she asked, clutching her skirts and preparing to bolt. "I know how to track someone when I need to," he said simply. "But I'm not here to take you back." "Then why are you here?" He was quiet for a moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see straight through all her carefully constructed defenses. "Because you look terrified in there, and because nobody should have to marry someone they don't love." The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. In all the chaos of the morning, in all her father's lectures about duty and family obligation, nobody had acknowledged the most basic truth of her situation. She was being forced to marry a stranger, and she was absolutely terrified. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know enough." He took a step closer, and she caught that scent again, cologne and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. "I know you'd rather hide in a rose garden in a wedding dress than walk down the aisle to the wrong man. I know you kiss like you mean it, even when you're desperate. And I know you deserve better than what's waiting for you in that ballroom." Daphne felt tears prick at her eyes. "You're wrong about one thing," she said. "I wasn't desperate when I kissed you. I was desperate to escape, but the kiss, that was something else entirely." The guard's expression shifted. something heated and hungry flickering in his blue eyes. For a moment, the air between them crackled with the same electricity she'd felt in the hallway, and Daphne found herself swaying toward him as if drawn by an invisible force. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Evan," he said. "Evan Hoffman." Evan. She liked the way it felt on her tongue, strong and honest. "I'm Daphne, but you already knew that." Daphne. The way he said her name made it sound like music, like something beautiful and rare. "What do you really want, Daphne?" "Not what your father wants, not what society expects. What do you want?" The question was so simple and so profound that it took her breath away. When was the last time anyone had asked her what she wanted? When was the last time she'd even allowed herself to think about it? "I want to design clothes that don't hurt the planet," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Sustainable fashion that proves you can be beautiful and ethical at the same time. I want to travel to places where they make fabric the old way, learn from artisans who've been perfecting their craft for generations. I want to build something meaningful, something that matters beyond profit margins and stock prices." Evan's smile was warm and genuine, transforming his serious face completely. "That sounds incredible. Why aren't you doing it?" "Because I'm Harrison Langford's daughter," she said bitterly. "Because I'm supposed to take over the family hotel chain and marry well and produce the next generation of little Langfords to carry on the legacy. Because dreams are luxuries that heiresses can't afford." "That's bullshit." The blunt words startled her so much that she actually laughed. "Excuse me." "You heard me. That's complete bullshit." Evan's eyes flashed with something that looked like anger, though she sensed it wasn't directed at her. "You think being born into privilege means you don't get to choose your own life? You think money means you have to sacrifice everything that makes you who you are?" "Don't you?" Daphne challenged. "Look around, Evan. Look at this estate, this life. Everything comes with strings attached. Everything has a price." "Maybe in your world," he said quietly. "But there are other worlds, Daphne. Places where people build their own success, where they choose their own families, where love matters more than mergers." There was something in his voice, a conviction that made her wonder what he knew about building success and choosing families. Before she could ask, the sound of approaching voices made them both freeze. "Check the rose garden again," Commander Rosewood's voice carried across the lawn. "And search the greenhouse. She has to be somewhere on the grounds." Evan immediately stepped in front of Daphne, his body shielding her from view. The protective gesture sent warmth flooding through her chest, a feeling she'd never experienced before. When was the last time someone had tried to protect her from anything? "There's a gardener's cottage on the far side of the estate," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the approaching security team. "It's been empty for months. You could hide there until dark, then figure out your next move." "What about you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Won't they realize you're not searching for me?" Evan's smile was mysterious, almost secretive. "Let me worry about that." He started to turn away, but Daphne caught his arm. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she saw his pupils dilate in response to her touch. "Evan," she said urgently, "thank you for helping me, for letting me go, for everything." "Daphne." The way he said her name was like a caress. "Be careful. And remember what I said. You deserve to choose your own destiny." Before she could respond, he was gone, melting back toward the mansion with the same quiet confidence he'd shown in the hallway. Daphne watched him go, noting how the other guards seemed to defer to him slightly, how Commander Rosewood nodded respectfully when Evan approached. There was definitely more to Evan Hoffman than met the eye. Have you ever made a desperate choice that changed everything? Share your most impulsive moment below. Chapter 2. The gardener's cottage sat at the edge of the estate like a forgotten fairy tale, ivy climbing its stone walls and wildflowers growing unchecked around its weathered wooden door. It should have felt like a refuge, but as Daphne sat on the dusty floor in her elaborate wedding dress, all she could think about was Evan Hoffman's blue eyes and the way he'd kissed her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She'd managed to slip inside just as the search teams reached the rose garden, her heart hammering as voices passed by the cottage windows. For the last 2 hours, she'd watched through the lace curtains as security guards combed through every inch of the estate grounds. The wedding had been postponed, guests were being served an elaborate brunch while they waited, and her father's voice could be heard even from this distance, sharp with fury and growing desperation. But Evan had been right about one thing. They hadn't thought to search the abandoned cottage. As the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows, Daphne found herself thinking about the conversation in the garden. The way Evan had looked at her when she'd talked about sustainable fashion, as if her dreams were not only valid, but valuable. The anger in his voice when he'd called her father's expectations bullshit. The mysterious quality to his smile when she'd asked about his own background. There had been something familiar about him, something that nagged at the edges of her memory. She was certain she'd never met him before today, but there was a quality to his presence, a quiet authority that seemed at odds with his position as a security guard. A soft knock at the cottage door made her freeze. She held her breath, pressing herself against the wall beside the window, her mind racing through possibilities. Had they finally thought to search here? Was her brief taste of freedom already over? "Daphne?" Evan's voice came through the door, quiet and careful. "It's me." Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. She hurried to the door, her silk skirts rustling in the silence, and pulled it open to find Evan standing there with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. The golden afternoon light. He looked different somehow. Still handsome, still carrying himself with that quiet confidence, but there was something in his expression that seemed almost vulnerable. "How did you get away?" she asked, stepping aside to let him enter the cottage. "I volunteered to search the north grounds," he said, setting the bag down on the cottage's small table. "Told Rosewood I knew those woods better than anyone. That bought me about an hour before I have to report back. And you came here instead." She watched as he unpacked the bag, revealing bottled water, sandwiches wrapped in paper, and what looked like a change of clothes. "Why?" Evan paused in his unpacking, his hand stilling on a simple cotton dress that looked like it would fit her perfectly. "Because you've been hiding in a wedding dress for hours without food or water. Because your father has security teams combing every inch of this estate, and sooner or later they're going to find you. And because..." "Because what?" He turned to face her fully, and the expression in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Because I can't stop thinking about that kiss." The words hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities and complications. Daphne felt her pulse quicken, felt that same magnetic pull that had drawn her to him in the hallway that morning. "Evan," she said softly, "I need you to know something. When I kissed you, it wasn't really about escaping. I mean, that's what I told myself, but what?" She took a step closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, close enough to catch that intoxicating scent that was uniquely his. "But the moment our lips touched, I forgot all about escape plans and forced marriages. For those few seconds, nothing existed except you and me and the way you made me feel." "How did I make you feel?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "Like I was worth something more than a business merger. Like I was beautiful for who I am, not what I represent. Like... ... She paused, struggling to find words for something she'd never experienced before. "Like I was home." The last word seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Something shifted in his expression, a wall dropping away to reveal raw longing and what looked almost like pain. "Daphne," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. "You have no idea what you're saying. Then tell me." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers trailing along the strong line of his jaw. "Tell me why you looked at me like you'd been waiting for me. Tell me why you helped a stranger escape her own wedding. Tell me why being here with you feels more real than anything else in my entire life." For a moment, Evan leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as if he were savoring the contact. Then, abruptly, he stepped back, running his hands through his dark hair in a gesture that seemed habitual. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Everything about today has been complicated," Daphne pointed out. "Try me." Evan was quiet for a long moment, staring out the cottage window at the approaching shadows. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured, as if he were choosing each word deliberately. "I've spent most of my life around wealth," he said. "Around people who have so much money they've forgotten what it means to struggle, to fight for something you really want. I've seen how that kind of privilege can corrupt people, make them think they're entitled to whatever they desire, regardless of who gets hurt in the process." "You're talking about people like my father," Daphne said quietly. "Yes." Evan's jaw tightened. People who see other human beings as chess pieces to be moved around for their own advantage. People who would force their own daughter into a loveless marriage because it serves their business interests. There was real anger in his voice, a passion that made Daphne wonder about his own experiences with wealth and privilege. Before she could ask, he continued, "But then I saw you this morning, standing in that hallway in your wedding dress, and everything I thought I knew about entitled rich girls went right out the window." "What do you mean?" Evan turned back to her, his blue eyes intense. "You weren't acting entitled. You weren't demanding that someone fix your problems or throwing money at a situation until it disappeared. You were terrified and desperate and completely alone, but you were still fighting. You were still trying to save yourself." "By kissing a stranger," Daphne said with a rueful smile. "By taking the only option available to you in that moment," Evan corrected. "By refusing to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How incredible." The admiration in his voice made warmth spread through her chest. "You make it sound heroic. I was just trying not to get trapped in a life I didn't choose." "That's exactly what makes it heroic." Evan stepped closer to her again, drawn despite his apparent efforts to maintain distance. "Most people would have given up, would have convinced themselves that duty and family obligation mattered more than personal happiness. But not you." "Maybe I'm just selfish," Daphne said, though she didn't really believe it. "No." Evan's voice was firm. "Selfish would be going through with the wedding and making Bradford Whitmore miserable for the rest of his life, just because it was easier than fighting. Selfish would be accepting a life of luxury and status while your heart died a little more each day. What you're doing, choosing to be authentic even when it costs you everything, that takes incredible courage." Daphne felt tears prick at her eyes. "Nobody's ever called me courageous before. Then nobody's ever really seen you before." The simple statement hit her like a lightning bolt. In all her life, surrounded by family and friends and society connections, she'd never felt truly seen by anyone. She was Harrison Langford's brilliant daughter, the MBA graduate who could analyze market trends and spot business opportunities. She was the heiress who looked perfect in designer gowns and made appropriate conversation at charity galas. But who was she really, underneath all those roles and expectations? Evan seemed to see her, not the name or the money or the social position, but the woman who dreamed of creating sustainable fashion and traveling to learn from artisans. The woman who would rather hide in a dusty cottage than marry someone she didn't love. "Evan," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "What do you see when you look at me?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze traveling over her face as if he were memorizing every detail. When he spoke, his voice was tender, almost reverent. "I see someone who's never been allowed to discover who she really is. Someone with incredible strength hidden under years of other people's expectations. I see intelligence and compassion and a spirit that refuses to be broken, no matter how hard the world tries to cage it." He paused, his blue eyes meeting hers. "I see the most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I'm not talking about your face or your body or your designer dress. I'm talking about the beauty that comes from being genuinely, authentically yourself." Daphne felt her breath catch. "Nobody's ever said anything like that to me before." "Then you've been spending time with the wrong people." Before she could think about wisdom or consequences or the fact that she barely knew this man, Daphne closed the distance between them. This time, when she kissed him, it wasn't desperate or calculated. It was honest, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been building between them since the moment their eyes first met. Evan responded immediately, his arms coming around her as if she belonged there, as if this was what he'd been waiting for his entire life. The The kiss deepened, filled with all the longing and recognition they'd both been trying to deny. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is crazy," Daphne whispered against his lips. "Completely insane," Evan agreed, but he didn't let her go. "I barely know you." "You know enough." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. "You know I'd rather help a stranger escape than force her into a life she doesn't want. You know I think your dreams are valuable and your courage is remarkable. You know I kiss you like I mean it. And I know you're nothing like what I expected." Something flickered in Evan's eyes at that comment, something that looked almost like guilt, but before she could analyze it, the sound of voices outside made them both freeze. "Check the cottage," Commander Rosewood's voice carried clearly through the evening air. "Hoffman said the north woods were clear, but we need to be thorough." Evan immediately stepped away from Daphne, his expression shifting back to professional alertness. "The bedroom," he said quietly, pointing toward a door at the back of the cottage. "There's a wardrobe you can hide behind." Daphne grabbed the cotton dress he'd brought and hurried toward the bedroom, her silk skirts rustling with every step. As she slipped behind the heavy wooden wardrobe, she heard the cottage door open and Evan's voice, calm and authoritative. "Commander Rosewood, any sign of Miss Langford?" "Nothing yet. What are you doing here, Hoffman? I thought you were searching the north perimeter." "Finished that section. Thought I'd double-check the cottage before reporting back." There was a pause, and Daphne held her breath, pressing herself against the wall behind the wardrobe. "Find anything?" Rosewood asked. "Empty. Been empty for months by the looks of it." Daphne closed her eyes in relief, amazed by how smoothly Evan could lie to his superior. There was definitely more to this man than she understood. "All right. Report back to the main house. Mr. Langford wants to speak with the entire security team." "Copy that." Daphne waited until she heard the cottage door close and the voices fade away before emerging from her hiding place. Evan was standing by the window, watching the security team disappear into the gathering dusk. "That was close," she said. "Too close." Evan turned back to her, his expression serious. "Daphne, you can't stay here much longer. They're going to search every building on the estate, probably multiple times. And your father, he's not going to give up easily." "I know." Daphne sank down onto the cottage's small bed, suddenly exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the day. "I just don't know where else to go." Evan was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "What if I told you I knew a place? Somewhere safe, somewhere your father's people would never think to look. I'd ask why you're willing to help someone you just met risk everything." "Because," Evan said, sitting down beside her on the bed, "sometimes you meet someone and you know, instantly and completely, that helping them is the right thing to do, even if it complicates your life, even if it changes everything." Daphne looked into his blue eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there. The inexplicable connection, the sense of recognition, the feeling that this man might be worth risking everything for. "Where?" she asked simply. "My place. It's not far from here, and it's the last place anyone would expect to find Harrison Langford's daughter." The suggestion should have terrified her. She barely knew Evan, and trusting him with her safety was beyond foolish. But as she looked at his face in the cottage's dim light, she realized she did trust him. Completely and instinctively, in a way she'd never trusted anyone before. "Okay," she said. Evan's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to agree so readily. "Just like that?" "Just like that." Daphne managed a small smile. "You said I deserved to choose my own destiny. Well, I'm choosing to trust you." Something shifted in Evan's expression, something that looked almost like pain. "Daphne, before you decide that, there's something you should know about me. Something that might change how you feel about all this." "What?" But before he could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. Evan glanced at it, and his expression grew grim. "What is it?" Daphne asked. "Security briefing in 10 minutes, all personnel required." He stood up, running his hands through his hair again. "I have to go, but we'll finish this conversation later. Get changed into the dress I brought. It'll be easier to move in. I'll come back for you as soon as I can." Evan, wait. Daphne caught his hand as he started toward the door. What were you going to tell me? He looked down at their joined hands, his thumbs stroking over her knuckles in a gesture that was both tender and somehow sad. That you're not the only one who's been hiding behind other people's expectations, he said quietly, and that sometimes the very thing you're running from is closer than you think. Before she could ask what he meant, Evan was gone, disappearing into the darkness outside the cottage and leaving Daphne with more questions than answers and a growing suspicion that there was much more to her mysterious savior than met the eye. What do you think about the power of choosing love over obligation? Have you ever had to make an impossible choice between your heart and your family's expectations? Share your thoughts below. As Daphne changed into the simple cotton dress Evan had brought her, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change again. The dress fit perfectly, too perfectly for a random guess, and the fabric was soft against her skin, a welcome relief after hours in the restrictive wedding gown. She folded the elaborate silk dress carefully, a part of her mourning, the symbol of everything she was leaving behind. The dress represented security, status, a future mapped out in luxury and social prominence, but it also represented a cage. And as she looked at herself in the cottage's cracked mirror, she realized she preferred the simple cotton. It felt like her, like the woman she might become if she had the courage to keep choosing freedom over fear. The cottage had grown dark while she waited for Evan's return, and Daphne found herself pacing the small space, her mind churning with questions. What had he meant about hiding behind other people's expectations? What was he going to tell her that might change everything? And why did she have the growing suspicion that Evan Hoffman was not at all what he seemed? She was standing by the window, watching for his return, when she spotted movement in the gardens. Not Evan, she would have recognized his confident stride anywhere, but someone else moving through the shadows with purpose. Sage Delacroix. Daphne's heart leaped as she recognized her best friend's silhouette. Sage was supposed to be in the mansion with the other bridesmaids, probably fielding questions about the missing bride and trying to cover for Daphne's absence. What was she doing sneaking through the gardens? A soft tap at the cottage door answered her question. Daphne? Sage's familiar voice called quietly. Please tell me you're in there. Daphne hurried to open the door, relief flooding through her as she saw her friend's concerned face. Sage Delacroix had been her closest friend since childhood, the daughter of her family's former chef who had grown up running through these same gardens and hiding in these same secret places. Sage, how did you find me? Girl, I know you better than anyone, Sage said, slipping inside and pulling Daphne into a fierce hug. When they said you'd disappeared, I knew you'd head for the old cottage. It's where you always came when you needed to think. What's happening at the house? Daphne asked, grateful beyond words to see a familiar face. Complete chaos, Sage said, sinking into the cottage's single chair. Your father is beside himself. Bradford is threatening to sue for breach of contract. Apparently your marriage was tied to some major business deal. The guests don't know whether to leave or stay for the entertainment value. And you? Sage's expression grew serious. I've been covering for you, telling everyone you must have gotten cold feet and needed some air. But Daphne, your father has hired private investigators now. This isn't just about a missing bride anymore. He's treating this like a kidnapping. A kidnapping? Daphne felt ice form in her stomach. Sage, what if they think someone took me? What if they blame... She stopped abruptly, thinking of Evan. If her father suspected she'd been taken, the security team would be scrutinized intensely. And Evan had been the last person to see her before she disappeared. Blame who? Sage asked, her dark eyes sharp with curiosity. There was a security guard, Daphne said carefully. He helped me get away. If they think I was kidnapped... They'll blame him, Sage finished. Daphne, you need to come back. Not to go through with the wedding, she added quickly, but to make it clear that you left of your own free will. You can't let an innocent person take the fall for your choice. Daphne felt the walls of the cottage closing in around her. She'd been so focused on her own escape that she hadn't considered the consequences for Evan. If her father suspected him of helping her, or worse, of taking her against her will, Evan could face serious criminal charges. "You're right," she said, her mind racing. "But I can't just walk back in there and announce that I've changed my mind about the wedding. My father will lock me in my room until I agree to marry Bradford." "Then what do you want to do?" Before Daphne could answer, the cottage door opened and Evan stepped inside. He moved quietly, professionally, but stopped short when he saw Sage sitting in the chair. "Who's this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Sage Delacroix. Meet Evan Hoffman," Daphne said. "Sage is my best friend. Evan is the guard who helped me escape." Sage studied Evan with the sharp assessment that had made her successful in her own career as a marketing executive. "So you're the one who helped our girl here avoid a lifetime of misery." "Something like that," Evan said, but Daphne noticed he seemed uncomfortable under Sage's scrutiny. "Evan, we have a problem," Daphne said. "Sage says my father thinks I might have been kidnapped. If they blame you, let me worry about that," Evan said quickly. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you somewhere safe." "No," Daphne's voice was firm. "I won't let you take the fall for my choice. Sage is right. I need to go back and make it clear that I left voluntarily." "Absolutely not," Evan said, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine alarm. "Daphne, if you go back now, your father will make sure you never get another chance at freedom. You said yourself he'd lock you up until you agreed to the marriage. Then what do you suggest?" Evan was quiet for a moment, and Daphne could see him weighing options, calculating risks. When he spoke, his voice was measured and careful. "There might be another way. A way to ensure your freedom without putting you back in your father's control." "What kind of way?" Sage asked suspiciously. Evan looked directly at Daphne, his blue eyes serious. "What if you weren't just Harrison Langford's runaway daughter? What if you were under the protection of someone your father couldn't touch?" "I don't understand," Daphne said. "Someone with enough influence and resources to make it clear that you're exactly where you choose to be, and that any attempt to force you into an unwanted marriage would have serious consequences." Sage leaned forward. "Are you talking about witness protection?" "Because I don't think I'm talking about me," Evan said quietly. The cottage fell silent. Daphne stared at Evan, trying to process what he was suggesting. "You?" she said finally. "Evan, you're a security guard. What kind of protection could you possibly offer against my father's influence?" Something shifted in Evan's expression, a decision being made in real time. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found what he was looking for. "Harrison Langford, please," he said when the call connected. "Tell him Evan Hoffman would like to speak with him about his daughter." Daphne felt the blood drain from her face. "Evan, what are you doing?" But Evan held up a hand, his attention focused on the phone call. "Mr. Langford, I have information about Daphne's whereabouts." "Yes? She's safe?" "No, she hasn't been kidnapped. Actually, she's with me, and she's here by choice. I think we should meet to discuss this situation. 20 minutes in your study?" "Yes, I'll bring her." He ended the call and looked at Daphne, who was staring at him in shock. "You just called my father," she said. "You told him I'm with you. Evan, do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I've bought us time and leverage," Evan said calmly. "Your father thinks I'm just a security guard who stumbled onto his missing daughter. He has no idea who he's actually dealing with." "Who is he dealing with?" Sage asked, voicing the question Daphne was afraid to ask. Evan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Daphne's face. "Someone who has been looking for a reason to take Harrison Langford down a few pegs for a very long time." "I don't understand," Daphne said, though a cold suspicion was beginning to form in her mind. "Daphne," Evan said gently, "I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am." "Who are you?" "My name really is Evan Hoffman, and I really am working security today, but that's not my usual job." "Then what is your usual job?" Evan took a deep breath, and Daphne could see him gathering courage for whatever he was about to reveal. "I'm the CEO of Hoffman Industries. We specialize in sustainable technology and green manufacturing. And as of 6 months ago, we became the largest private competitor to your father's hotel empire." The words hit Daphne like a physical blow. She sank down onto the bed, staring at Evan as if she were seeing him for the first time. "You're a CEO," she said slowly. Yes. Of a major corporation. Yes. That competes with my father's business. Yes. Sage whistled low. Well, this just got interesting. Daphne felt like the world was tilting around her. You're rich. Very, Evan said quietly. And you were working security at my wedding because I needed to see your father's operation firsthand. Because I've been investigating some questionable business practices, and today's event was the perfect opportunity to gather information. He paused. And because I wanted to understand the man who could force his own daughter into a marriage she clearly didn't want. So this was all business to you, Daphne said, her voice hollow. Helping me escape, the kiss, everything, it was just corporate espionage. No, Evan's voice was fierce, urgent. Daphne, no, that's not. The business investigation was why I was there, but everything that happened between us, that was real. That was the most real thing I've experienced in years. How can I believe that? Daphne stood up, pacing to the window, her mind reeling. You lied to me about everything, about who you are, what you do, why you were there. I didn't lie about anything that mattered, Evan said. I didn't lie about thinking you deserved better than Bradford Whitmore. I didn't lie about your dreams being valuable. I didn't lie about the way I felt when I kissed you. But you didn't tell me the truth either. Because I knew exactly what would happen if I did, Evan said. I knew you'd assume I was just another wealthy man trying to manipulate you. I knew you'd think I was using you for business advantage. I knew you'd look at me the same way you look at Bradford Whitmore, like I was everything you were trying to escape from. Daphne turned back to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Are you? Are you just like Bradford? Do you think I am? The question hung in the air between them. Daphne studied Evan's face, looking for traces of the entitled arrogance she'd seen in Bradford, the calculating coldness she'd seen in her father. Instead, she saw vulnerability, genuine concern, and what looked like fear that she would reject him for his wealth rather than accept him despite it. I don't know what to think, she said honestly. Then let me prove it to you, Evan said. Let me show you that not all wealthy men are like your father or Bradford. Let me show you that I'm willing to use everything I have to protect your right to choose your own life. How? By walking into your father's study and making it clear that you're under my protection. By letting him know that any attempt to force you into an unwanted marriage will result in serious consequences for his business empire. By giving you the freedom to choose what you want without fear of retaliation. Sage, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, finally spoke up. Girl, do you realize what he's offering? He's offering to go to war with your father for you. That's not small potatoes. But why? Daphne asked, looking directly at Evan. Why would you risk your business, your reputation, everything for someone you just met? Evan stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his blue eyes, close enough to catch that familiar scent that made her pulse quicken despite everything. Because, he said softly, sometimes you meet someone and you know instantly and completely that they're worth fighting for, even if it complicates your life, even if it changes everything. He was using her own words back to her, the words she'd spoken when she asked why he was willing to help a stranger. But now they carried a different weight, a deeper meaning. Evan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you have every reason not to trust me right now, he said. I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are complicated, and I've kept too many secrets. But Daphne, what I feel for you is real. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that not all wealthy men are interested in caging beautiful birds. Some of us prefer to watch them fly. The poetry of his words, the sincerity in his voice, the way he was looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world, it all combined to create a moment of perfect clarity. Daphne had spent her entire life surrounded by men who wanted to control her, possess her, use her for their own purposes. But Evan was offering her something entirely different. He was offering her freedom, protection, and the space to become whoever she wanted to be. More than that, he was offering to love her not despite her strength and independence, but because of it. Okay, she said simply. Okay? Evan's eyebrows rose. Okay, I'll let you prove it. I'll let you walk into my father's study and fight for my freedom. She stepped closer to him, reaching up to touch his face the way she had in the cottage earlier. But Evan, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that this isn't about winning against my father. Promise me that this isn't about business or competition or corporate rivalry. Promise me that this is about us, about what's happening between us, about the fact that we found each other in the most impossible circumstances. I promise, Evan said, leaning into her touch. Daphne, I promise that every risk I'm about to take is about you, about us, about the fact that I kissed a desperate woman in a hallway this morning and discovered that I'd been waiting my whole life for that exact moment. Then let's go, Daphne said. Let's go face my father together. As they prepared to leave the cottage, Sage stood up and smoothed her bridesmaid dress. Where are you going? Daphne asked. With you, obviously, Sage said. Girl, you think I'm missing the show when Evan Hoffman reveals himself to Harrison Langford? This is going to be better than any reality TV drama. Despite everything, Daphne found herself smiling. You know this could get ugly. Honey, Sage said with a grin, ugly is when your best friend almost married Bradford Whitmore. This is just interesting. And as they stepped out of the cottage into the night air, Daphne realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She was ready to fight for her freedom, and she wasn't fighting alone. Chapter 3. The Langford mansion blazed with light as they approached, every window glowing against the darkness like a beacon of wealth and power. But as Daphne walked beside Evan toward the main entrance, she felt different than she had that morning. She was no longer the trapped heiress fleeing in a wedding dress. She was a woman who had chosen her own path, walking beside a man who was willing to risk everything to protect her right to choose. Evan moved with a confidence she hadn't noticed before, his posture and bearing subtly different now that he was no longer playing the role of security guard. This was how he looked in boardrooms, she realized. This was the man who had built a technology empire from nothing, who commanded respect from investors and competitors alike. Are you nervous? She asked as they climbed the marble steps to the front door. Terrified, Evan admitted with a rueful smile, but not for the reasons you might think. What do you mean? I'm not worried about facing your father. I've dealt with men like Harrison Langford my entire career, but I'm terrified that after tonight, you'll look at me and see just another wealthy man trying to control your life. Daphne stopped walking, turning to face him fully on the mansion's grand portico. Evan, listen to me. I've spent my entire life around wealthy men who wanted to control me. I know what that looks like, how it feels. And whatever this is between us, it's not that. How can you be sure? Because, she said, reaching up to straighten his tie in a gesture that felt both intimate and natural, controlling men don't ask what you want. They don't spend hours listening to your dreams about sustainable fashion. They don't risk their careers to help you escape a marriage you don't want. And they definitely don't look at you the way you're looking at me right now. How am I looking at you? Like I'm the most precious thing you've ever seen, like you'd rather die than see me hurt, like ... She paused, searching for the right words. Like, you love me. The words hung between them in the night air, vulnerable and honest and terrifying in their simplicity. Evan's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded flickering in his blue eyes. I do, he said quietly. I know it's crazy and impossibly fast, and the timing couldn't be worse. But Daphne, I am completely, desperately in love with you. Evan, I'm in love with your courage and your dreams and the way you light up when you talk about creating something beautiful. I'm in love with your intelligence and your compassion and the fact that you'd rather run away in a wedding dress than compromise your principles. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. I'm in love with the woman who kissed a stranger because it was her only chance at freedom, and I'm in love with the woman who's brave enough to walk back into this house and fight for what she believes in. Daphne felt tears gather in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of finally hearing the words she'd been waiting her whole life to hear from someone who truly meant them. "I love you too," she whispered. "I don't know how it happened so fast, but I love you too." The kiss they shared on her father's portico was nothing like the desperate collision in the hallway that morning. This was soft and reverent and filled with promise, a seal on words that would change both their lives forever. When they finally broke apart, Sage cleared her throat loudly from behind them. "Not to interrupt this beautiful moment," she said, "but your father is probably wondering why his security guard is late for their meeting." "Right." Evan straightened his shoulders, transforming back into the CEO who was about to walk into enemy territory. "Are you ready for this?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Daphne said, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. They entered the mansion through the main foyer, and Daphne was struck by how different everything looked. The same marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the same priceless artwork and elaborate floral arrangements, but somehow it all felt smaller now, less intimidating. The golden cage that had trapped her for 25 years seemed almost quaint compared to the vast possibilities that stretched out before her. Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the foyer as if she'd been waiting for them, her wise eyes taking in Daphne's simple cotton dress and Evan's protective presence beside her. "Miss Daphne," the elderly housekeeper said warmly, "I'm so glad you're safe." "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Evan Hoffman. Evan, this is the woman who practically raised me." The housekeeper studied Evan with the sharp assessment of someone who had spent decades reading people's characters. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded approvingly. "Mr. Hoffman, your father is waiting in his study. She paused diplomatically. "Quite eager to speak with you." "I'm sure he is," Evan said with a slight smile. As they walked through the mansion's familiar corridors, Daphne found herself remembering all the times she'd walked these same halls feeling trapped and hopeless. Tonight, with Evan's presence steady and reassuring beside her, those feelings seemed like echoes from another lifetime. They reached the heavy oak doors of Harrison Langford's study, and Daphne could hear voices from within, her father's commanding baritone and Bradford Whitmore's petulant complaints about breach of contract and damaged reputation. "Last chance to change your mind," Evan said quietly. "Not a chance," Daphne replied firmly. "Let's do this." Evan knocked on the study door, and Harrison Langford's voice boomed from within. "Enter." The study was exactly as Daphne remembered. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books that were more for show than reading, and the massive mahogany desk where her father conducted the business that had made him one of the wealthiest men in the state. Harrison sat behind that desk now, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the day's chaos, his expensive suit impeccable even after hours of crisis management. Bradford Whitmore III sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, his wedding attire rumpled and his expression petulant. When he saw Daphne enter, his face transformed into a mask of injured entitlement. "Daphne," he exclaimed, rising from his chair. "Thank God you're safe. When you disappeared, I thought, well, we all feared the worst." "I'm fine, Bradford," Daphne said coolly. "As you can see." Harrison Langford's attention, however, was focused entirely on Evan. Daphne watched her father's expression shift from relief at seeing her safe to confusion as he studied the man beside her. "You must be the security guard who found my daughter," Harrison said, his tone carrying the dismissive courtesy he used with service employees. "I trust she hasn't been any trouble." "Actually," Evan said, his voice calm and professional, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not just a security guard, Mr. Langford. My name is Evan Hoffman, and I'm the CEO of Hoffman Industries." The silence that followed this announcement was so complete that Daphne could hear the antique clock on the mantelpiece ticking. Harrison's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, a kind of cold calculation that she'd seen many times before. "Hoffman Industries," Harrison repeated slowly. "The sustainable technology company that's been undercutting my hotel chain's environmental initiatives." "The same," Evan confirmed. "What the hell's going on here?" Bradford demanded, looking between Daphne and Evan with growing alarm. "Who is this man, and why was he working security at our wedding?" Your wedding? Daphne turned to face Bradford, her voice sharp with anger. Bradford, there was never going to be a wedding. I've been trying to tell you for months that I don't want to marry you, but apparently nobody thought my opinion mattered. Don't be ridiculous, Daphne, Bradford said dismissively. Of course you want to marry me. We're perfect for each other. The merger of our family's assets alone makes it the logical choice. For you, maybe. Not for me. Harrison Langford stood up behind his desk, his commanding presence filling the room. Enough. Daphne, I don't know what this man has told you or what he's promised you, but you will not embarrass this family any further. You will apologize to Bradford, and you will reschedule this wedding for next month. No. The simple word fell into the study like a bomb. Harrison's eyebrows rose, clearly not accustomed to being refused by anyone, especially not by his own daughter. Excuse me? I said no, Father. I won't apologize to Bradford for refusing to be sold like cattle to improve your business prospects. I won't reschedule a wedding to a man I don't love and never could love. And I won't spend one more day pretending that my happiness doesn't matter. Your happiness? Harrison's voice rose with incredulity. Daphne, you are 25 years old. You have an MBA from Harvard and a trust fund worth millions. You live in luxury that most people can only dream of. What more happiness could you possibly need? The happiness that comes from choosing my own life, Daphne said firmly. The happiness that comes from building something meaningful instead of just inheriting something profitable. The happiness that comes from being loved for who I am, not what I represent. And you think you'll find that with this man? Harrison gestured dismissively at Evan. A corporate rival who is obviously using you to gather intelligence about our family business? Actually, Evan said, stepping forward, my interest in your daughter has nothing to do with business intelligence. Though I admit what I've observed today has confirmed several of my suspicions about your character. Harrison's face darkened dangerously. How dare you? How dare I what? Point out that you're willing to force your own daughter into a loveless marriage for the sake of a business merger? How dare I suggest that Daphne deserves better than being treated like a commodity in a corporate acquisition? You know nothing about my relationship with my daughter, Harrison said coldly. I know that she was so desperate to avoid marrying Bradford Whitmore that she was willing to kiss a complete stranger and run away in her wedding dress, Evan replied. I know that she spent years dreaming of creating sustainable fashion, but has never been allowed to pursue those dreams because they don't fit your business plan. And I know that she's never felt truly valued for who she is, rather than what she can contribute to the Langford empire. How could you possibly know any of that? Bradford demanded. Because she told me, Evan said simply. Because I listened to her. Because I care more about her happiness than about her usefulness to my business interests. Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. How noble. And what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Hoffman? That my daughter run away with you and abandon her responsibilities to her family? I'm proposing that you respect your daughter's right to make her own choices, Evan said. I'm proposing that you recognize her as an independent adult who deserves to choose her own husband, her own career, and her own life. And if I refuse? Evan's expression grew cold, and for the first time, Daphne saw the ruthless businessman who had built an empire from nothing. Then you'll discover exactly how much influence Hoffman Industries has with your major hotel chain's corporate clients. You'll learn how quickly investors can lose confidence in a company whose leadership is publicly exposed for unethical business practices. And you'll find out what happens when someone with unlimited resources decides to make your company's environmental violations a matter of public record. The study fell silent again. Harrison Langford was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He understood exactly what Evan was offering. Protect Daphne's freedom or face corporate warfare that could destroy everything he'd built. You're threatening me, Harrison said quietly. I'm explaining the consequences of continuing to treat your daughter like property, Evan corrected. The choice is yours, Mr. Langford. You can respect Daphne's decision and maintain your business empire, or you can continue trying to control her life and discover just how expensive that choice becomes. Bradford, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, finally exploded. This is insane! Daphne, you can't seriously be considering throwing away everything we've planned for some stranger you met today. Bradford, Daphne said, turning to face him with calm certainty. I've been trying to tell you for months that I don't want to marry you. The only thing I'm throwing away is a life I never wanted in the first place. But the business merger will have to happen without using me as collateral, Daphne said firmly. I'm not a business asset, Bradford. I'm a person with my own dreams and desires, and none of them include being your wife. Bradford's face flushed red with indignation. After everything I've invested in this relationship— What relationship? Daphne interrupted. Bradford, we've never had a real conversation about anything that matters to either of us. You've never asked about my dreams or my fears or what makes me happy. You've never even asked if I love you because you know what the answer would be. Love? Bradford scoffed. Daphne, we're talking about marriage, not some teenage romance. Love is irrelevant to people like us. Love is the only thing that's relevant to people like us, Daphne said. Love is what makes all the wealth and privilege and opportunity meaningful. Without love, we're just empty shells playing out roles that other people wrote for us. She turned to look at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. Father, I know you think you were protecting me by arranging this marriage. I know you believe that security and status matter more than personal happiness, but I can't live that way. I won't live that way. And what will you live for? Harrison asked. This man you've known for less than a day? Some fantasy about becoming a fashion designer? I'll live for the possibility of building something beautiful and meaningful, Daphne said. I'll live for the chance to be loved by someone who sees me as more than a business opportunity. I'll live for the freedom to discover who I really am when I'm not trying to be who everyone else expects me to be. Harrison studied his daughter's face for a long moment, and Daphne could see him weighing options, calculating costs and benefits, the way he approached every major decision. And if I agree to this insanity, he said finally, what guarantee do I have that you won't regret this choice? What happens when the romance fades and you realize you've given up everything for a man you barely know? Then I'll deal with the consequences of my own choices, Daphne said. But Father, I'd rather risk heartbreak with someone I love than guarantee misery with someone I don't. Evan stepped closer to Daphne, his presence warm and reassuring at her side. Mr. Langford, I understand your concerns about your daughter's future, but I want you to know that my intentions toward Daphne are completely honorable. I'm not interested in her trust fund or her social connections or her family's business empire. I'm interested in her. And what exactly are your intentions? Harrison asked. To spend the rest of my life making sure she knows how precious she is, Evan said simply. To support her dreams, whatever they might be. To love her, not despite her strength and independence, but because of them. Pretty words, Harrison said skeptically. True words, Evan corrected. Mr. Langford, I've spent years building my company because I wanted to prove that business success and ethical behavior aren't mutually exclusive. I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I've never found anything that made it feel meaningful. Until today. Until I met a woman who was willing to risk everything for the chance at authentic happiness. He turned to look at Daphne, his blue eyes warm with love and admiration. Your daughter is the most courageous, most genuine person I've ever met. She deserves a life filled with love and respect and the freedom to become whoever she wants to be. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life helping her build that life. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between his daughter and the man who had just declared his love for her in front of witnesses. Finally, he sank back into his chair behind the desk. Daphne, he said quietly, are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Daphne said, and you're willing to give up your inheritance, your place in the family business, everything you've grown up expecting? Father, I'm not giving up anything that ever really mattered to me. I'm finally claiming the only things that do matter, love, freedom, and the chance to build something meaningful with my own hands. Harrison looked at his daughter for a long moment, and Daphne saw something shift in his expression. For just a moment, the calculating businessman disappeared, and she caught a glimpse of the father, who had once read her bedtime stories and promised her she could be anything she wanted to be. "You really love him," Harrison said. It wasn't a question. "I really do. And you, Mr. Hoffman? You're prepared to take on the responsibility of making my daughter happy?" "I'm prepared to spend my life trying," Evan said. "Though honestly, sir, I think your daughter is perfectly capable of making herself happy. I just want to be the man who gets to support her while she does it." Harrison was quiet for another long moment, his fingers steepled as he considered the situation from every angle. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a resignation that Daphne had never heard before. "Bradford," he said, not looking at the younger man, "I believe it's time for you to leave." "What?" Bradford's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Harrison, you can't be serious. We have contracts, agreements." "We have contracts for a business merger," Harrison corrected. "Those contracts never required my daughter's participation, though I'll admit I hoped they would include it. The merger can proceed without the marriage, though it will require some restructuring of the terms." "But Daphne and I—" "There is no Daphne and I," Harrison said firmly. "There never really was there? My daughter has made her choice clear, and I'm finally listening to what she's been trying to tell us all along." Bradford looked around the study as if seeking support, but found none. Sage, who had been observing the entire confrontation from her position near the door, gave him a little wave that was more dismissive than friendly. "This is a mistake," Bradford said, his voice tight with wounded pride. "Daphne, when this infatuation burns out and you realize what you've given up, don't expect me to be waiting." "I won't," Daphne said simply. "Bradford, I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved, but that person was never going to be me." After Bradford left, slamming the study door behind him with childish petulance, the room felt lighter somehow. Harrison stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the gardens where his daughter had hidden from her own wedding just hours before. "You know," he said quietly, "your grandmother would have liked him." "Evan?" Daphne asked, surprised by the sudden shift in her father's tone. She'd always said that the right man for you would be someone who saw your strength as a gift rather than a threat, someone who would want to build something with you rather than for you. Harrison turned back to face them. "I think she would have approved of your choice." "And what about you?" Daphne asked softly. "Do you approve?" Harrison studied Evan for a moment, taking in the protective way he stood beside Daphne, the respect in his eyes when he looked at her, the quiet confidence that spoke of a man comfortable with powerful women. "I think," Harrison said slowly, "that I've spent so many years protecting you from the wrong things that I forgot to protect the right ones. I forgot that your happiness matters more than our social standing. I forgot that love is worth more than any business deal." He walked over to his daughter and took her hands in his expression gentle in a way she hadn't seen since childhood. "Daphne, I owe you an apology. I let my fear of losing you drive me to control you instead. I thought if I could map out your entire future, I could guarantee your happiness. But happiness can't be guaranteed, can it? It has to be chosen every day by people brave enough to risk their hearts for something real." Tears gathered in Daphne's eyes. "Father, I'm proud of you," Harrison continued. "I'm proud of your courage in running away from a life you didn't want. I'm proud of your determination to build something meaningful. And I'm proud that you chose love over security, even when it meant disappointing the people you care about." "I never wanted to disappoint you," Daphne said, her voice thick with emotion. "You haven't disappointed me. You've reminded me what really matters." Harrison turned to Evan. "Mr. Hoffman, I have a proposition for you." "Sir?" "I'd like to discuss the possibility of Hoffman Industries partnering with Langford Hotels on some environmental initiatives. It seems my daughter isn't the only one in this family who could benefit from thinking more sustainably." Evan's eyebrows rose. "You're offering me a business partnership?" "I'm offering you a chance to show me that corporate rivals can become family," Harrison said with a slight smile. "Besides, if you're going to marry my daughter, we might as well find a way to work together instead of against each other." "Did you just—" Daphne started, then stopped, staring at her father. "Did you just give us your blessing?" "I'm giving you my blessing to choose your own life," Harrison said, If that life includes Mr. Hoffman, then I suppose I'd better get used to having a son-in-law who's smarter than I am. I don't know about smarter, Evan said with a grin, but definitely more in love with your daughter than any merger agreement could ever make me. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and following your heart? What helped you find the courage to make that choice? Share your story below. We'd love to hear how you navigated that difficult decision. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Daphne had ever experienced. Mrs. Abernathy appeared with champagne and the news that the wedding guests had finally been sent home with elaborate gift bags and apologies for the postponement. Sage regaled them with stories of Bradford's dramatic exit, complete with threats to sue everyone in this house for emotional distress. But for Daphne, the most beautiful moment came when she and Evan finally found themselves alone on the mansion's moonlit terrace. The gardens stretched out before them, the same gardens where she had hidden that morning in her wedding dress, terrified and desperate and completely alone. "Regrets?" Evan asked, pulling her into his arms as the night breeze carried the scent of jasmine and roses around them. "Only one," Daphne said, smiling up at him. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to kiss you properly." "Properly?" Evan's eyes sparkled, with amusement. "Are you suggesting that our first kiss wasn't proper?" "Our first kiss was desperate and impulsive and completely insane," Daphne said, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "This one is going to be intentional and passionate and absolutely perfect." "Is that a promise?" "That's a guarantee." When their lips met this time, it was with the full knowledge of what they were choosing. Not just each other, but a life built on mutual respect and genuine love. Not just passion, but partnership. Not just romance, but the real, complicated, beautiful work of building something meaningful together. The kiss deepened, and Daphne felt herself melting into Evan's embrace. His hands tangled in her hair as hers clutched the front of his shirt, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared completely. There was no mansion, no family expectations, no business empires or corporate rivalries. There was just this, the perfect rightness of being exactly where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Daphne could see her own amazement reflected in Evan's blue eyes. "Wow," she said softly. "Definitely wow," Evan agreed. They stood there for a moment, foreheads touching, sharing breath and the wonder of having found each other against all odds. "Evan," Daphne said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you were working security today, before all this happened, what were you thinking about? What did you want out of life?" Evan was quiet for a moment, considering her question seriously. "Honestly, I was thinking about how empty everything felt. I had more money than I could spend, a company that was succeeding beyond my wildest dreams, all the external markers of success that anyone could want. But I felt completely disconnected from everything that mattered." "What changed?" "You." His smile was soft, wondering. "You kissed me in that hallway, and suddenly everything that had felt meaningless became crystal clear. I realized I'd been building an empire, but not a life. I'd been so focused on proving I could succeed that I'd forgotten what success was supposed to feel like." "And what does it feel like?" "Like this," Evan said, pulling her closer. "Like holding someone you love and knowing they love you back just as fiercely. Like having someone who believes in your dreams and wants to build new ones with you. Like finding the person who makes you want to be better not because they're trying to change you, but because they make you want to deserve the love they're offering." Daphne felt tears gather in her eyes again, but these were tears of pure joy. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Evan replied, "more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "So what happens now?" Daphne asked. "I mean, we've resolved the immediate crisis of my father trying to marry me off to Bradford, but we still barely know each other. We're still moving impossibly fast. We're still perfect for each other," Evan finished. "Daphne, I know this is all happening quickly. I know it probably seems crazy to everyone else, but when something is right, it's right. And this is the rightest thing I've ever experienced." Even though I come with complicated family dynamics and trust fund drama and a burning desire to revolutionize sustainable fashion? Especially because of all that, Evan said with a laugh. Besides, I come with my own complications. A technology empire, a complete inability to cook anything more complex than toast, and an apparently incurable tendency to work security details at weddings I'm trying to infiltrate. Those hardly seem like complications, Daphne pointed out, more like interesting character quirks. See? We're perfect for each other. They stood there in comfortable silence, holding each other as the night settled around them. In the distance, Daphne could see lights starting to come on in the city beyond the estate, millions of people living their own complicated, beautiful, messy lives. Evan, she said suddenly, I want to show you something. She led him through the gardens to a small studio space that had been built behind the old greenhouse. It was a place her grandmother had used for painting, a place Daphne had claimed for her own secret projects years ago. Inside, the walls were covered with sketches and fabric samples, design ideas for the sustainable fashion line she'd been dreaming about for years. Mood boards showed color palettes inspired by nature, while sketches depicted elegant dresses and sophisticated separates made from innovative, eco-friendly materials. This is what I've been working on in my spare time, Daphne said, suddenly nervous about sharing something so personal. It's probably naive to think I could actually build a business around this, but it's incredible, Evan interrupted, moving through the studio with obvious amazement. Daphne, these designs are sophisticated and beautiful and completely unique. This isn't naive. This is visionary. You really think so? I think you're going to revolutionize an entire industry, Evan said firmly, and I think I know exactly how to help you do it. What do you mean? Evan turned to face her, his eyes bright with excitement. Hoffman Industries has been developing new sustainable materials for packaging and manufacturing. But what if we expanded into textiles? What if we created the most beautiful, most environmentally responsible fabrics the fashion world has ever seen? You'd do that? You'd restructure part of your company to support my dreams? Daphne, Evan said, taking her hands in his, I'd restructure my entire life to support your dreams. I'd move mountains if it meant watching you create something this beautiful. The sincerity in his voice, the absolute conviction in his eyes, left Daphne breathless. This was what love looked like, she realized. Not someone trying to control or diminish your dreams, but someone wanting to help you build them bigger and better than you'd ever imagined possible. Partners? She asked softly. Partners, Evan confirmed, in business, in life, in everything. Even if I turn out to be terrible at the business side of things? Especially then, Evan said with a grin. I happen to know a thing or two about business, and you happen to know everything about creating beauty and meaning. Together, we're going to be unstoppable. As they kissed again in the moonlit studio, surrounded by Daphne's dreams made tangible, she couldn't help but think about how the day had started. 24 hours ago, she had been a trapped heiress with no way out, and no one who truly understood her. Tonight, she was a woman in love with someone who not only saw her dreams but wanted to help her build them. Sometimes, she thought, as Evan's arms tightened around her, the most desperate choices led to the most beautiful destinations. And sometimes, kissing a stranger was exactly the right thing to do. 3 months later, Daphne stood in the showroom of her new sustainable fashion boutique, watching as customers explored the racks of elegant, environmentally responsible clothing. Each piece was made from innovative fabrics developed through the partnership between her new company, Langford Sustainable Designs, and Hoffman Industries' textile division. The boutique was everything she had dreamed of and more. A bright, airy space that showcased not just beautiful clothes, but the stories behind them. Information cards beside each piece detailed the sustainable materials used and the fair trade artisans who had contributed to their creation. It was fashion with a conscience, beauty with a purpose. The Henderson order is ready to ship, Sage announced, appearing at Daphne's elbow with a tablet full of logistics information. True to form, Sage had quit her marketing job to become Daphne's business partner and chief operations officer the moment she learned about the new venture. Already? We just finalized those designs 2 weeks ago. That's what happens when your boyfriend owns the most efficient manufacturing operation on the East Coast, Sage said with a grin. Speaking of which, your boyfriend is here. Daphne looked up to see Evan entering the boutique, his presence immediately transforming the space, just as it had transformed her life. He moved through the showroom with obvious pride, stopping to examine displays and chat with customers who had no idea they were talking to the man who had helped create the revolutionary fabrics they were admiring. When he reached Daphne, his smile was warm and full of love and admiration for what she had built. "How's business?" he asked, pulling her into his arms for a quick kiss that still made her pulse quicken. "Booming," Daphne said. "We just got orders from 3 more major retailers, and Vogue wants to do a feature on sustainable luxury fashion." "That's my brilliant girlfriend," Evan said proudly. "That's our brilliant business model," Daphne corrected. "This never would have worked without your textile innovations. And it never would have existed without your vision and courage." They were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Harrison Langford entered the boutique looking every inch the successful businessman, but his expression was warm with paternal pride. "Father," Daphne hugged him, still amazed by how much their relationship had improved since she'd chosen her own path. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see what all the fuss was about," Harrison said, looking around the boutique with obvious approval. "The Times business section has been raving about Langford's sustainable designs for weeks. And I can see why." Harrison picked up one of the information cards, reading about the organic cotton and innovative dyeing processes with the attention he usually reserved for quarterly reports. "This is impressive work, Daphne, both the environmental innovation and the business execution." "Thank you," Daphne said, touched by his approval in a way she hadn't expected. "Actually," Harrison continued, "I have a proposition for both of you." "Oh," Evan raised an eyebrow. "Langford Hotels is planning a complete renovation of our flagship properties over the next 2 years. We want to position ourselves as the most environmentally responsible luxury hotel chain in the world." Harrison looked between his daughter and Evan with obvious satisfaction. "I'd like Hoffman Industries to handle the sustainable technology upgrades, and I'd like Langford Sustainable Designs to create custom uniforms for all our staff." Daphne felt her breath catch. "Father, that would be a massive contract." "It would be a family contract," Harrison corrected, "though I suppose that brings me to my real question." He turned to look at Evan directly. "When exactly are you planning to make an honest woman of my daughter?" "Father?" Daphne exclaimed, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. But Evan just smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket to pull out a small velvet box that made Daphne's heart skip several beats. "Actually, sir," Evan said, "I was hoping to discuss that with Daphne tonight. But since you're here—" He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the boutique, and Daphne felt the entire world narrow down to his face, his voice, and the ring that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. "Daphne Langford," Evan said, his voice warm with love and certainty. "3 months ago, you kissed me in a hallway and changed my entire life. You showed me what it meant to be brave, what it looked like to choose authenticity over safety, what it felt like to be loved for exactly who I am." Tears gathered in Daphne's eyes as customers and staff gathered around them, drawn by the obvious romance of the moment. "You've built something beautiful here," Evan continued, "something that makes the world better just by existing. But more than that, you've shown me how to build a life that matters, how to use success in service of something bigger than myself, how to love someone completely while helping them become exactly who they're meant to be." "Evan," Daphne whispered, hardly able to speak around the joy expanding in her chest. "Will you marry me?" he asked simply. "Will you be my partner in everything forever? Will you help me spend the rest of my life proving that the best business decisions are the ones that are made with the heart?" "Yes," Daphne said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, absolutely, completely yes." The ring slipped onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her hand specifically. As Evan stood and kissed her, the boutique erupted in applause from customers and staff who had witnessed the proposal. But for Daphne, the most beautiful sound was her father's voice behind them, quiet and full of satisfaction. "Welcome to the family, son." That evening, as they celebrated their engagement at the mansion where everything had started, Daphne found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From desperate bride fleeing her own wedding to successful entrepreneur engaged to the love of her life, it seemed impossible that so much could change in such a short time. "Regrets?" Evan asked, echoing his question from their first night together on the terrace. "Not a single one," Daphne said, admiring the engagement ring that caught the moonlight like captured stars. "Though I do have one confession." "What's that?" "I'm pretty sure I was halfway in love with you before I even kissed you that first time." "Impossible," Evan said with mock seriousness. "Love at first sight is a myth." "Is it?" Daphne challenged. "Then explain how I knew instantly and completely that kissing you was exactly the right thing to do." "Because you're brilliant and brave and you recognize quality when you see it?" "Because you looked at me like I was worth saving," Daphne said softly. "Because even in that moment of complete chaos, you saw me as a person worth helping rather than a problem to be solved. And that's when you knew you loved me? That's when I knew you were different from every other man I'd ever met. The love part." She paused, smiling at the memory. "The love part happened when you helped me escape, and then came back to make sure I was safe, and then risked everything to give me the freedom to choose my own life." "Well, when you put it that way," Evan said, pulling her closer, "I suppose love at first sight isn't so impossible after all." "Not impossible," Daphne agreed, "just impossible to explain to people who haven't experienced it. Good thing we don't have to explain it to anyone but ourselves." As they danced on the terrace to music only they could hear, Daphne thought about all the women who might be listening to their story someday. Women trapped in expectations that didn't fit. Women afraid to choose love over security. Women who had forgotten that they deserved to be cherished for exactly who they were. She hoped their story would remind those women that sometimes the most desperate choices led to the most beautiful destinations. That sometimes the scariest leap was the one that taught you how to fly. And that sometimes, when everything seemed hopeless, love was just a single brave decision away. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart. Subscribe for more passionate love stories that celebrate authentic connection. Comment below with your own experiences of choosing love over obligation. Share this story with someone who needs to hear about the power of following your heart. Tomorrow, we'll share another tale of unexpected love that proves sometimes the most beautiful connections bloom in the most surprising places. Until then, remember that you deserve a love that sees you, values you, and fights for your right to choose your own happiness. Your heart knows the way. You just have to be brave enough to follow it.